This is the food web and energy pyramid notes. What you're going to be doing in this is you're going to have to identify the different trophic levels. That's basically kind of what they eat at each level. So you're going to have to analyze a food web and pick out what the producers, herbivores, carnivores are, etc. And then you're going to have to describe how energy moves through the ecosystem. We're going to look at something called an energy pyramid here. So the application in the real world. So we need to know this because we need to know what happens if we overhunt or if we change the population level of a different species. So this is what causes you different deer seasons, different rockfish seasons if you're a fisherman or a hunter. So this is why you can only fish or hunt at specific times of the year and how much you can actually do that, because it's going to affect the food web and what organisms can survive. So we are going to have to understand the food web to best make the rules to keep the species alive. So what you guys are going to do is you can either pull up on your note sheet. If you're online, you can use the Google Draw, and that's what I'm going to use. Or you can draw the thing on paper if you want to cut out the animals and paste them. Whichever one you feel more comfortable, you can do it that way. So, before we get started with making the food web, we just have to understand what the arrows mean. So, first of all, the arrows go from the prey, this zebra here, to the predator, the lion. They don't, so they go, if you think about it, the zebra is going into the lion when the lion eats it. And the reason why we draw arrows that way is because the energy from the zebra is getting transferred to the lion when he eats it. Alright, so the arrows show the transfer of energy. So now we're going to go through and talk about the different parts. So I'm going to leave the PowerPoint here, and we're going to go to the food web. So you're just going to have to follow along as I go through this. So the first thing that we talk about is producers and autotrophs. These here pictures, the berries, the grass, and algae, are all producers or autotrophs. So I'm going to put this definition right here. And basically a producer or autotroph is something that can use sunlight to make food. So they do photosynthesis, and we'll talk more about that later on in the class. And they're usually found at the bottom of the food web. And they don't have any arrows going to them because nothing is, they're not eating anything. And they're taking in nutrients from the ground, but they're not really eating. And they make their own food from sunlight. Alright, the next thing on the food web is our herbivores. Alright, herbivores are things that only eat plants. So there's things like a grasshopper, insect, and a rabbit. These guys are all herbivores. And how a herbivore will be seen on here is that they'll have lines going from only grass to them. So they'll only have lines going from the grass to them. And a herbivore, the definition of it is a herbivore only eats plants. Alright, so herbivore only eats plants. So these guys, the rabbit, grasshopper, and insect, only eat plants, so they only have arrows coming from the plants. Another classification of animal on a food web, and this is actually what humans are, I'm going to move this herbivores over here. I just made that. Come on. Alright, is a bear and a mouse are examples of herbivores. And the reason why they're examples of, not herbivores, omnivores, is because they eat plants and animals. So these are usually the hardest ones to pick out from the food web. And they generally have two arrows coming from them. So one from plants and one from animals. So this bear has an arrow from a berry and a rabbit. The mouse will eat grass, will eat grasshoppers, eat insects. Alright, so it has arrows again coming from plants and animals, so it is an omnivore. Those are usually the hardest ones to pick out. The next one are our carnivores. Carnivores are things like fox, snakes, and fish. Of course, there's more of them. And carnivores only eat meat. Alright, so the carnivores here would only have arrows coming from other animals. Alright, so insects are animals, even though they're very few meat, they are animals. Alright, so now we got a few more types of organisms to put in here. We have scavengers, like a vulture. So you've seen vultures on the side of the road eating dead animals, and scavengers eat dead animals, animals that are already dead. They can have arrows coming from really anything because they eat animals that are already dead. So any animal they can have arrows coming from. Finally, the last thing, well, the second to last thing we have to talk about, one more term after this, is a decomposer. Decomposers are fungi, so those are mushrooms, and they break down dead organisms. If I could get this to work. Ugh. Alright, they break down dead things. So this fungus breaks down dead things. So these mushrooms you'll often find on dead trees, and they'll eat, they don't really eat, they break them down slowly and recycle the nutrients back in the soil. So they'll have arrows coming from a whole bunch of things. Alright, the last term we're going to talk about is heterotroph or consumer. So there is autotroph or producer down below. Heterotroph and consumer is all of these animals up here. They are the vulture, fox, bear, rabbit, grasshopper, insect, fish, mouse, snake, and even fungus, because they have to eat for energy. So they're the opposite of autotroph or producer. Alright, so that's our food web. I'm just going back to the PowerPoint quick. So we've covered all those, and if you need the definitions again, you can go back to the PowerPoint. Now, two things I want to talk about quickly with food webs before we move on to energy pyramids is that food webs also show the biodiversity, or the number of different species in the ecosystem. If the food web is disrupted by taking out one of those organisms, so the biodiversity decreases, then the ecosystem could fall apart or destabilize. So if we look at some examples here, if we take out the grass here, then the grasshoppers are going to die off because that's the only thing they're eating in this food web, and then the mouse is going to decrease, and the snakes are going to decrease. So you see how it just kind of cascades, and vultures will decrease because we took that grass out. The rabbit is also going to decrease, which then so it pretty much decreases everything. All right, so we have to make sure we keep certain plants and animals in our ecosystems to keep other organisms alive. If we would kill off the snake, then rabbits could actually overpopulate and decrease the grass, and then the grasshoppers would go down. So you see how it's a cascade of things? So I have other examples over here on the left, but you basically just need to look at what they're eating or what they're getting or what they eat, and if you decrease one, the other one will increase or decrease also. So again, if we take out if we take out organisms from the ecosystem, it could collapse. Alright, now the energy pyramids is another way to show the food web. And an energy pyramid looks like this. So I'm not going to take the time to make it, but we have the producers always on the bottom, herbivores on the second level, and carnivores on the third, fourth. Omnivores we would put in there, but you couldn't really tell if it's an omnivore because, again, they eat plants or animals. So this bear could be, here, or he could be here. It depends. So I didn't put him on. And then decomposer to scavenger, same thing. Depending on what they're eating, they could be on any level. And so we're just going to focus on these three. So the autotroph or producers on the bottom, then the herbivores, then the carnivores. Now, the reason why we put it in the energy pyramid is because it shows us how much energy goes from one animal to another. So what happens is when the rabbit eats a food, it only keeps 10% of the energy. It actually 90% of the energy is lost. All right, and that's lost as waste. So they don't actually keep all the energy that they eat from the grass because they can't digest a lot of it. And then they also lose it as heat, and they just plain use the energy. All right, so that is they only keep 10%, so they can only give 10% to the next level. So if we were to do this, if the plants have 1,000 units of energy, you take 10% of that, 100 units. So the rabbit only gets 100 units of the 1,000 units of energy that they have because it lost 90%, only kept 10%. Take 10%, you just take away a zero. And then the same thing happens when you go to carnivores. Again, carnivores have to eat, move around, so they use a lot of weight, heat, and they don't actually digest the whole product, so they lose they lose a lot of waste, so only 90% is lost, and they only keep 10%. So again, you take away a zero, so they would only get 10 units of energy from the original plants. Remember, all energy originally comes from the sun. Now, since there's less energy to support these organisms, is you'll see tons of producers. If you just look outside, you see trees and grass everywhere because they have unlimited energy from the sun. But then you'll see a decent amount of these guys flying around because they need less energy. They can get a decent amount of energy from the producers, but then you'll see low numbers of these guys, and then if there's even a top carnivore, you'll even see less of those because there's not enough of the animals and not enough of the energy to give them off. So as this pyramid gets smaller, the levels get smaller, so does the population size and the energy. And that is it. So you just need to understand food webs, how to read them, the energy pyramid, and why the energy decreases and where the organisms go on it. And you need to know biodiversity and how we humans can affect the food web and everything else. All right, so that is it for these notes.